This is the Heartland Daily Podcast.
I'm Sterling Burnett, Heartland Senior Fellow and Managing Editor of Environment and Climate News. I'm pleased to have as a returning guest today, geologist Gregory Wrightstone. Gregory, who is a member of, among several other professional associations, the American Association for the Advancement of Science and the Geological Society of America. Gregory had a best-selling book published last year that has brought him both a lot of accolades and praise and a great deal of criticism and insults. Inconvenient Facts, the Science Al Gore Doesn't Want You to Know. Most recently, Gregory has become the executive director in training at the Co2 Coalition, taking over the helm beginning in January. Co2 Coalition has published a couple of studies recently on important climate topics. That's what I've gotten him here to discuss today. And since this is the election season and Joe Biden, while not politically an unknown quantity, his energy and climate plans, having only been just recently shaped by Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, are a little unexplored territory, so I thought I'd ask him to touch on that today as well. Greg, you're here on an auspicious occasion, as it turns out. This is my 300th podcast for Heartland. Thanks for being here.
Oh, good to be back on with you. Wow, what an honor. And that's saying something for your viability, and I know I listen to the Heartland podcast every week, so I'm pleased to be joining you today.
Well, we're good to have you on. Now, before we discuss the CO2 Coalition's papers and Biden's energy plans for our listeners, and we get new listeners all the time, so some may not be familiar with you. So please tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you came to work on climate issues, and what the CO2 Coalition is, and how you came to join them.
Yeah, it's been it was a circuitous route for me to get to climate change. I'm a geologist. I've been looking at Earth's processes for many decades now. And I started looking, I got drawn into it because I said, well, some of the things we're being told about climate change, I know as a geologist, it's just not right. It can't be happening. And one of those we'll explore later, and that's ocean acidification. That's one of the white papers that the CO2 Coalition just published concerning that. And it was that, and so I took a deep dive into this, and what I found, frankly, it angered me, because what I found was what we were being told was completely opposite of what the science, the facts, and the data that I explored, the actual base data, was telling me. And just time after time after time, if it was fires, tornadoes, floods, hurricanes, these things that they just what we were being told by the UN and the proponents of man-made catastrophic warming was, again, completely opposite. And I was drawn to write this book. It was a mission of mine. In fact, even today, it was published over 2 years ago. We're still on Amazon. We're number 3 bestseller in at least one category today. So it's still we still got a lot of interest in it. And I'm currently hip deep into writing my next book. The title is A Very Convenient Warming, and I'm going to explore in that book really it's just in 3 sections. The first is disproving this idea of unusual and unprecedented warming that we see today, starting with a complete takedown of Michael Mann and his hockey stick. The section I'm working on right now relates climate over the last 4,000 years with human history and the strong relationship between the rise and fall of temperature and the rise and fall of civilizations. And what's fascinating is that it's just opposite. Again, it's just opposite of what we're being told. We're being told, oh my God, we can't let it get 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees to 3 degrees warmer, and we're all going to die. But that's not what human history tells us. We've already been there. We've been there during the Minoan warm period, the Roman, and the medieval warm periods. We've experienced those higher temperatures, and life thrived.
And so, all of those higher temperatures were experienced before there was one power plant on Earth or one SUV on the roads, or roads for that matter.
Oh, yeah, exactly. If you look back, I've got some real devastating charts in there that I'm going to be including in this book relating CO2, atmospheric CO2, to the temperatures. And there's we look at through human history and look through geologic history. CO2 is not controlling temperature. through thousands and even millions of years. But we're being told, oh, well, that's all changed. That all changed back in the middle of the 20th century when we started adding CO2. No, it didn't. That's not the way science works. That's not the way geologic history tells us it works. And it's my goal for this next book is I want it to be a very important book that cuts the legs out from under this idea of man-made catastrophic warming.
Well, tell us about the CO2 Coalition, because you're also you're wearing multiple hats here.
Yeah, I was doing lots and lots of interviews in TV. I did over 300 interviews in 2019 alone, and was on Fox a lot doing interviews. I was getting the word out. I was approached by some wealthy individuals back at the end of last year that said, "Look, we like what you say, and we like how you say it. You need to get your message of CO2 improving the earth and warming not being a detriment. We need to." They were looking into creating a 501c3. Well, we started looking into it, and about that time, I was contacted by the CO2 Coalition, and I said, "Well, this is exactly what they had talked about doing," and it's the philosophy of the CO2 Coalition. It was formed in 2015 to promote this idea of CO2 being a beneficial molecule. It's a miracle molecule, not the devil, the evil molecule. And we talked, and I said, "Boy, what a great vehicle." And because their philosophy and mine, what's now our philosophy, we went hand in glove together. And so I'm going to be joining them as the executive director in January, taking over for Dr. Caleb Rossiter, who's retiring at the end of the year. And we're going to be advancing and getting their message out. And the strength of the CO2 Coalition is a little bit different from some of the other groups, and it's a very, very science, technical-based group. Some of the top scientists in the world, including Will Happer from Princeton, and Dr. Richard Lindzen, Pat Michaels. You know these. Your listeners, I'm sure, have heard of many of these. Patrick Moore, and in fact, Patrick and I will be. He also got taken down by Facebook for actually posting that. He said that of course the climate's changing. It always changes. And they said, no, that's misleading. So we're going to go back. And he got killed on Facebook. They said that's misleading, is what it was. It was crazy that he said, well, of course climate's changing. It always changes, and that's what did him in. So once I get on board there, I think we're going to be really using a lot of the research that I've done for my current book to go back. Again, I identify, Sterling, I've identified two central questions that need to be fought, and they can be fought and answered easily. And the first one is our current temperatures unusual and unprecedented? If they are, in the scale of thousands of years, if they are unusual and unprecedented over 4,000 or 2,000 years, that's a strong support for man-made warming, isn't it? If they're not, though, if they're not unusual, they're not unprecedented, that we have other warming periods over the last several thousand years that were warmer than we are today, well, then that's a strong, strong support for the current temperature and the warming. We're in a warming trend, of course, as you know. It's been warming for over 300 years. That this warming trend is nothing more than a cycle of the same cycles of warm and cold that we've seen really since the dawn of time. And the other item I think that we need to confront is this modest warming we've seen combined with increasing CO2 leading to catastrophic consequences, or is it benefiting the Earth's ecosystems and by extension humanity? I look around, and that's the last part of my book that I'm going to be dealing with. By almost every metric, virtually every metric you can look at, the Earth's ecosystems and humanity, the human condition, is improving. It's improving. It's not even close. Again, life expectancy, crop growth, vegetation growth, and things like that. Just and
Greg.
So we can do that.
Yeah, mm-hmm. I hate to cut you off, but we'll have you back on when the book comes out and talk all about your book. Let's get.
Sorry about that.
That's all okay. Right. It's just we got a lot to cover, and we don't.
Yeah.
So you've released some white papers, and you've got one forthcoming from the CO2 Coalition. Among these is we won't be able to do any one of them justice or go into detail, but among these, one you've already sort of talked about a little bit was the purported threat to ocean health from acidification from the increase in dissolved CO2 in the oceans. This is what got you going. Let's talk about the gist of the paper. Are shellfish and corals going to soon be dissolved in acid seas? Will we not be able to bathe because we'll come out without skin?
Not at all. Ocean acidification was a made-up terminology used to scare people, and the people that did it have admitted to that, and we can capture that in this white paper. And if we look, the allegation is that atmospheric CO2 increase is driving an acidification of the ocean. The oceans are the main sink or the repository for most of the carbon dioxide on Earth. It's in the ocean water, usually at depth, and that any of the surface water or the air that interacts with the surface, the CO2 that gets absorbed there is rapidly used by algae, and we get the big algal blooms, and it really is driving. That's the basis of the ocean life, is this use of increased CO2. What we do see is that we have deep upwelling currents from the ocean that are lower alkalinity, if you will, closer to being acid, that come up and they feed again where these upwelling currents come. Life is abundant because the creatures, the algae and so forth that are right there.
The nutrients mix with the upwelling.
Correct. And then when that occurs, photosynthesis increases the alkalinity. So this is an ongoing process of this, and we see that also that the oceans have decreased slightly. I believe we're at about pure water's at 7, and seawater's around 8.2. Even the IPCC agrees that even if we increase CO2 to what they expect it to be in 2100, the lowest that the pH level will be about 7.8 to 7.9, still firmly alkaline. So if we actually, the correct terminology for this instead of ocean acidification would be to say that the oceans are becoming slightly less caustic rather than they'll never acidify.
Well, I think your study said, I may be wrong, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it said something like they'd have to double CO2 again, it would have to increase it, I don't know, 400% or something to take it
to that 7 point.
Yeah,
right,
and it would take over 400 years to do that. So we're nowhere near where they got this is these fake studies where they put clams and shellfish in buckets, and they'd slowly turn ocean water acidic by pouring acid into it. And they think, oh gosh, when it becomes acidic, these things dissolve. Well, yeah, of course. You pour acid on something, it dissolves. That's right. It's amazing that we funded scientific studies that showed that. But
right, and they completely ignore all of the many organic mechanisms that move and use CO2 throughout the Earth's ecosystems.
Right. So in the second paper that y'all produced, Dr. Bruce Everett examines the claim that pervasive fossil fuel subsidies hamper the more rapid development of wind and solar power. Does he find this claim to be true? And if not, why not? And if so, why not? Why?
Yeah, there were some big studies done by the IEA and International Monetary Fund that claimed that there were $5.3 trillion in subsidies that were subsidizing fossil fuels. Well, it turns out that virtually all of that came from what they assessed to be negative effects. They weren't really subsidies. They were negative effects. in fact, they said there were the 5.3 trillion of that only 0.3 or $300 billion were actually direct subsidies. The rest of these were actually what they call externalities. In other words, negative effects due to global warming, traffic congestion, local air pollution, things like that. So it's a very small percentage compared to that we're dumping into renewable energy development.
And in fact, the taxes on I think the study found that the taxes in most countries are quite high. Where you do have subsidies. My wife's from Venezuela, for instance, and where you do have subsidies is Venezuela sells its gasoline when they can make it now at world market prices. Their people get pretty cheap gasoline. And that's true for a lot of petrostates. So they subsidize the consumption of oil within their countries, but they don't subsidize the production of oil and gas. And what your study found, I think, is that, they get the same tax credits that other people get, but we'll call it a subsidy when the oil companies get it. And what it also pointed out is they also pay a lot in taxes. There are many countries where I think they said the U.S. is $50 billion more in taxes than supposed than is supposedly justified, or than anywhere near the subsidies they get. So, in fact, people don't know this, but the second largest source of income for the federal government, if Biden gets elected and this goes away, because contrary to popular belief, he did say he'd ban fracking, but then he qualifies and says, on federal lands. Okay, well, the second biggest source of income is oil and gas production on federal lands, just behind the income tax. So you take that away, you take away even more revenue for the federal government at a time when its revenue is hurting. So the third of the CO2 Coalition's most recent papers, the one that's coming out next week, actually, touches on a topic near and dear to my heart, the impact of Western climate policies on the poorest people in developing countries. I call this green colonialism, imposing wealthy societies' concerns on those who have so little, saying your kids will die 100 years from now from climate change when they're starving today. The paper, African Lives Matter, is co-authored by Kathleen Hartnett-White, former chair of the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, and Caleb Stewart-Roster, your current executive director at CO2 Coalition, former professor of statistics for public policy at the University of Western Cape, South Africa, so it's also near and dear to his heart. What is the gist of the paper, and what have been and will likely be the impact of policies to restrict fossil fuel development on the poor?
Yeah, if we look at in the paper, Caleb states that there are 3 billion people who cook, heat, and light inside their homes with solid fuels like wood, charcoal, and dried animal dung. And this leads to almost 4 million people who die an early death from various diseases like pneumonia and heart disease and the like. In fact, eye disease and cataracts and things like that I was just looking earlier today of a woman in Nepal that was 42 was nearly blind from cataracts because she's been exposed to this. But it's nearly 4 million people share that. And in Africa alone, they're estimated that indoor pollution deaths stand at just under 500,000, 500,000 people. So what this paper is doing is promoting the idea that Africa has an abundance of coal deposits, and that Caleb and Will Happer and others took a visit to the Turk plant in Alabama, which is the only clean coal technology plant in operation. And they're proposing here that we could use that technology, bring American technology to Africa, and virtually the only thing that comes out of the stack of the plant is that miracle molecule CO2 and water vapor. So they're not adding to any of the outdoor air pollutions like NOx and SOx and things like that they could cut that way down, virtually to nothing to do that. And we could then provide that electricity across the continent of Africa. because it turns out that, and I didn't know this until I read the paper, was that up to 50% of the electricity generated is actually diesel-generated electricity. They have these diesel generators ready to kick on whenever a brownout or a blackout happens, which happens regularly. And that much across much of Africa, half of the electricity is actually generated by these soot-spewing, black smoke-generating diesel generators that kick in across some various cities in Africa. We can provide abundant, affordable, and reliable electricity to the continent of Africa using this technology.
Well,
it's really.
I mean, we can, but I don't think we even have to use that technology. I'm sorry. I hear a lot of things about the clean coal, and clean coal's great if you can afford it, but it's more expensive technology than a normal coal plant. I think China's right now kicking our butt in Africa because they're not building one clean coal plant at the cost of 3 normal coal plants. They're building 3 normal coal plants and reducing pollution. Indoor air pollution is much more deadly than the modest amount of outdoor air pollution that will increase. And I think we just need to get over there. But instead, our World Bank and the U.S. banks, they're not loaning money.
And we're still, the United States is still backing Obama-era policies, which do not allow us to fund any coal-fired plants.
Yeah, not even clean coal plants. Not even clean coal plants. So I just think we need to stop telling Africans what kind of power they can have.
That's it. It's the new colonialism for American policy, and we can lift millions, tens of millions of people up out of generational poverty in Africa by providing them this, and it should be American technology, or like you say, China's going to do it. And once they're on the hook to China, it's not very good for their country either.
China's not going to do it. They are currently doing it. They're not. It's not some future state where they're doing this. They're building coal plants across Africa. They're in the process. They're funding them themselves, and they're building them as part of their is it Golden Road or Silk Road initiative. So they're getting their influence in Africa while we sit on the sidelines and carp about climate change and the future of our shores 100 years from now. It's atrocious. And that's just the poor and developing countries. I'm sorry. We got poor people right here. I've been to rural Appalachia and, places in New Mexico, reservations and places where they need cheap energy today, not, intermittent, unreliable energy if they can get it, or expensive energy, as we take cheap energy offline and put expensive energy online. It's sad. This paper is important. I hope people read it when it comes out. Moving on to a topic which is likely on the top of our listeners' minds right now is the election. You've examined Democratic candidate for President Joe Biden's climate and energy proposals. Give us some highlights of what it will demand and how it is likely to impact jobs, the economy, and people's abilities to freely choose the housing, appliances, and cars of their desire.
There's been a lot of discussion on the Green New Deal. On his website, he calls it the Green New Deal a crucial framework, and he advocates for society-wide effort to reduce emissions. So we just heard in the most recent debate, and recently he says, no, we're not in support of the Green New Deal. So there's a little conflict there. But the big thing, no matter what we talk about, is that he's probably the most important thing here is to get to a net zero carbon dioxide emissions by 2050. And it's supposed to have $1.7 trillion in direct government spending on clean energy. We've seen, though, that we've had other estimates of $18 to $20 trillion over the first 10 years. The Green New Deal itself has been estimated as cost as much as $100 trillion. Now, I can't advocate one way or the other for either Joe Biden or Donald Trump, but I can tell you what each one of these have promised. And this is directly from his website. So the key thing here, a couple key things, is a net zero by 2050, net zero carbon dioxide emissions and he's agreed a return to the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement, and to impose that on the United States. Now, of import, I know you know it, but your listeners may not know it. There's a very momentous day coming up here on November 4th, the day after the election, and that is when the United States is officially out of the Paris Climate Accord. Donald Trump made that pledge November 4th of 2019, and it had 1 year it had to wait before it became actually in place. So that takes place on November 4th, and that's a good thing for American policy and economy.
So we've covered a lot of ground. Before we sign off today, is there anything else you'd like to add concerning the CO2 Coalition? What's going on? I know we discussed privately some stuff that's going on with LinkedIn with you, or from an energy and climate perspective before people go to the polls.
Well, the CO2 Coalition, I've just experienced censorship on LinkedIn today, which I had never heard of before. In fact, they deplatformed me. But the CO2 Coalition has faced similar things with their Facebook page. They blew it up whenever they were exposed. They had people with Stacey Abrams, Tom Steyer, and the like actually wrote a letter about the CO2 Coalition to Facebook to try and ban them from Facebook, and that blew up in their face. So they're, according to Caleb, they've not seen any pushback over the recent few weeks. But that's the thing, they're trying to, I see more and more restrictions on social media. I think it's just going to get worse and worse, and I'm not sure what there is to do about it. But again, I'm just experiencing that today. I had a large following on LinkedIn, and my posts often got 15 or 20,000 views within 24 hours, but no more. We'll see what happens, though.
Well, so many things are going on during this election season that it's just it's madness, and the censorship during this so-called woke moment that's just coming, not just for climate skeptics, but for all sorts of anyone who would question a role for larger government in our lives and more day-to-day intervention and interference in our lives. They're just getting silenced. Anyone who still believes in small government are getting squashed. So it's sad. I hope you get it worked out, and I look forward to following your work at the CO2 Coalition. Greg, we've been pleased you could be with us today. I want to thank you on behalf of myself and our listeners.
Thank you so much, Sterling.
Listeners, thanks for checking on us today. Please check Heartland's website as we follow the work of Gregory Wrightstone and the other researchers and scholars at the CO2 Coalition, and as we track the progress of energy and environmental laws and regulations that affect you. And go frequently to our PolicyBot site, your one-stop shop for free market solutions to public policy problems. In addition, if you're not already receiving these podcasts daily on your favorite device, go to iTunes and subscribe when you have the time, and please rate our podcast on iTunes so you can help us expand the reach of free market ideas. Thanks. Take care. Bye.